The stairs didn't bother her anymore. Dr. Eleanor Carter was used to walking into rooms where her presence sparked silent questions. Is she really the one in charge? Could she possibly be that good? They rarely expected the best cardiothoracic surgeon in the state to be a black woman. Eleanor didn't care. She had lives to save. Before we get down to business, we want to hear your opinion. Write to us in the comments, what is your name and from which city are you watching us? Your support is very important to us. We will be grateful if you like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for participating with us in this important project. Today, she was en route to do just that, performing a high-stakes heart surgery on one of the most influential business leaders in the country. The pressure was immense, but it wasn't the surgery she was worried about. It was something far less predictable, something she couldn't cut open and fix. By the time she reached the boarding gate at the airport, the whisper of unease had already begun. And within moments, it would grow into a storm. The stairs didn't bother her anymore. Dr. Eleanor Carter walked confidently through the bustling terminal of Atlanta International Airport, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Heads turned as she passed, a tall black woman in an immaculate gray suit, wheeling a designer carry-on behind her. Some admired her elegance, others questioned her audacity. Eleanor was used to it. She had a purpose today, a flight to Chicago, where an elite hospital awaited her arrival. On the operating table tomorrow would lie Marcus Ellington, a billionaire philanthropist whose failing heart had stumped every other surgeon. Eleanor, however, thrived on cases others deemed impossible. Her Mercedes gleamed in the parking garage, a reminder of how far she'd come. From humble beginnings in South Carolina to graduating at the top of her class at Harvard Medical School, Eleanor had defied expectations at every turn. But for every accolade, there was always someone ready to remind her that being the best wasn't always enough when your skin was black. She moved seamlessly through security, her frequent flyer status ensuring a smooth process. After checking her bag, she made her way toward the gate, her thoughts focused on the intricate bypass procedure ahead. Her phone buzzed with a message from the Chicago hospital's administrator. Safe travels, Dr. Carter. Mr. Ellington's family is deeply grateful. Eleanor smiled faintly, tucking her phone away. She didn't care about gratitude or prestige. For her, the only satisfaction came from knowing her patients could walk out of the hospital with a second chance at life. At the gate, the boarding process began. Eleanor retrieved her ID and boarding pass, ready to board with the other first-class passengers. But as she stepped forward, an airport employee, a man in his late 40s with a stiff demeanor, held up a hand. "Ma'am, I'll need to see your ID again," he said, his tone clipped. Eleanor blinked, surprised. "You just saw it at security." "It's protocol," he replied, though the line of passengers behind her moved forward uninterrupted. She glanced around. No one else was being stopped. A knot of irritation tightened in her chest. "You didn't ask anyone else for their ID," she said, her voice calm but firm. The man's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm asking you, ma'am. If you have nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem." Eleanor's heart pounded, not with fear, but with anger. This wasn't protocol. It was profiling, thinly veiled and deeply insulting. Eleanor's grip tightened on her ID as the airport employee's words hung in the air. "If you have nothing to hide." The audacity made her blood boil. She handed over the card, her eyes locked on the man's face, daring him to say more. "This is unnecessary," she said, her voice calm but icy. "Why aren't you stopping anyone else?" The employee glanced at her ID, his expression blank. "It's a random check," he said flatly, though his gaze lingered on her name and picture longer than it needed to. "Random," she repeated, incredulous. "I've been through security. I'm a first-class passenger. This is harassment." A few passengers in the waiting area turned their heads, sensing the tension. Eleanor could feel their eyes on her, some curious, others judgmental. She wasn't the type to cause a scene, but this wasn't about her pride, it was about principle. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job," the man said, handing back her ID. "No," she replied sharply. "Your job is to ensure the safety of all passengers, not to single someone out based on the color of their skin. I'd like to speak to your supervisor." The man's jaw tightened. "That won't be necessary." "It is necessary," Eleanor shot back. "Because this isn't random. And I won't let it slide." The tension escalated as a security officer arrived, summoned by Eleanor's insistence. She explained the situation clearly and succinctly, her tone controlled but firm. The officer seemed uncomfortable, casting nervous glances between Eleanor and the gate agent. By now, a small crowd had formed. Phones were discreetly aimed in their direction, capturing the confrontation. "What's going on here?" a calm, authoritative voice interrupted. Eleanor turned to see a man in a pilot's uniform approaching. His name badge read Captain Lawrence, and his expression shifted the moment their eyes met. "Dr. Carter?" he asked, surprise and recognition evident. "Yes," she replied, equally puzzled. "I can't believe it," Captain Lawrence said, his tone softening. "You performed the heart surgery on my wife last year. You saved her life." Eleanor's steely demeanor faltered for a moment. She remembered the case, an emergency bypass on a woman in her 50s, one of the most challenging procedures of her career. "Yes, I did," she said. The pilot turned to the gate agent and the security officer, his voice firm. "Dr. Carter is one of the most respected surgeons in the country. What's going on here?" The gate agent stammered, "It was just protocol." "No, it wasn't," the pilot said. "And I suggest you apologize immediately." The gate agent mumbled a reluctant apology, but Eleanor wasn't interested in his words. She simply wanted to move on. "Captain Lawrence," she said, "thank you, but I'd prefer to board now." "Of course," he said, nodding. "We'll make sure you're comfortable. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to show your support." Eleanor was escorted onto the plane, bypassing the remaining passengers. She was seated in the first-class cabin, offered the best seat available. As she settled into her seat, she felt a mixture of emotions, vindication, frustration, and exhaustion. Why did it take someone recognizing her worth for her to be treated with respect? As the plane taxied down the runway, Eleanor stared out the window, her mind churning. She had won this battle, but the war against the biases she faced daily was far from over. The waiting area had grown quiet as the tension escalated. Eleanor stood tall, her arms crossed as she stared down the gate agent, who was now visibly flustered. The security officer's presence did little to reassure her, if anything, it amplified her frustration. "I'm not moving until someone explains why I was singled out," Eleanor said, her voice clear and steady. "Ma'am, please," the gate agent muttered, glancing nervously at the growing crowd. "It's just protocol." "Don't insult my intelligence," Eleanor shot back. "If it's protocol, show me where it says I'm the only one who needs additional verification." Passengers began murmuring among themselves. A few even voiced their support. "She's right, why only her?" The whispers of solidarity were enough to unnerve the gate agent further, his authority visibly unraveling under the scrutiny. "Let's all stay calm," the security officer interjected, but his tone lacked conviction. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. Calm isn't the issue here. Integrity is. What kind of system allows people to be humiliated under the guise of random checks? It was then that Captain Lawrence appeared, drawn by the commotion. He scanned the scene, his eyes landing on Eleanor. His expression shifted to one of recognition and concern. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, his authoritative voice cutting through the noise. She was asked for additional identification, the gate agent began, but the captain raised his hand to silence him. "Dr. Carter," the captain said, addressing Eleanor directly. Yes, she replied, her posture relaxing slightly. Captain Lawrence turned to the others, his tone firm. This woman saved my wife's life. Do you understand that? She's one of the most skilled surgeons in the country, and she deserves more respect than this. The gate agent looked as though he wished he could disappear. The security officer shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting to the floor. Captain, I appreciate your words, Eleanor said, her voice softening, but this isn't about recognition. It's about fairness. No one should have to go through this, no matter who they are. The captain nodded. You're absolutely right, Dr. Carter. I'll make sure this is handled appropriately. He turned to the gate agent. I suggest you apologize and ensure she's boarded immediately. The gate agent stammered out an apology, but Eleanor barely acknowledged it. She was escorted to the plane, the tension in the waiting area dissipating as quickly as it had begun. As she took her seat in the first-class cabin, she let out a slow breath. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired. She gazed out the window, her thoughts churning. Today, it was me. Tomorrow, it'll be someone else. The plane began its ascent, but for Eleanor, the real climb, the fight for dignity and justice, was far from over. Eleanor settled into the plush first-class seat, her mind still racing from the confrontation at the gate. The cabin was quiet, the hum of the engines and the occasional clink of glasses the only sounds breaking the stillness. A flight attendant approached her cautiously, carrying a tray with a drink. Dr. Carter, compliments of the captain, she said, setting down a glass of sparkling water with a slice of lemon. Eleanor managed a polite smile. Thank you. The gesture was kind, but it did little to soothe the storm inside her. She glanced at the boarding passengers, some of whom gave her subtle nods of solidarity as they passed by. It was a small comfort, knowing others had noticed the injustice. Yet, as the plane climbed higher into the sky, she couldn't shake the bitterness. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached cruising altitude. On behalf of the crew, welcome aboard. I'd also like to personally thank Dr. Carter for joining us today. Some of you may not know, but she's the surgeon who saved my wife's life. It's an honor to have her on this flight. Eleanor froze. Heads turned toward her, and she could feel the weight of their stares. A few passengers clapped hesitantly, unsure if the moment called for applause. She gave a small nod of acknowledgement, her cheeks warm with discomfort. She appreciated the sentiment, but this wasn't the kind of attention she wanted. The flight attendant returned with a warm blanket and asked quietly, "Can I get you anything else, Dr. Carter?" "No, thank you," Eleanor replied. She leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes in an attempt to block out the world. Her thoughts wandered. The captain's recognition had resolved the immediate situation, but it left her with a deeper unease. What if he hadn't been there? What if I were just another passenger, another black woman asked to prove she belonged? Would anyone have spoken up? Would anyone have cared? The clouds outside the window were thick and endless, mirroring her swirling thoughts. She thought about the patient waiting for her at the hospital and the life-or-death stakes of her work. That patient didn't care about her skin color, only her skills. A flight attendant announced that dinner service would begin soon, but Eleanor barely noticed. She was too busy making a mental promise to herself, "I'm not going to let this slide." People need to understand that respect isn't a privilege, it's a right. The plane continued its smooth flight toward its destination, but for Eleanor, the journey was only beginning. When the plane touched down, Eleanor stepped into the terminal with her head held high. A driver waited for her just beyond the gates, holding a placard with her name. Despite the luxury car waiting to whisk her to the hospital, she felt a lingering weight from the earlier confrontation. The hospital staff greeted her with reverence, their admiration evident as they led her to the operating room. The patient's family waited anxiously, and Eleanor gave them a reassuring nod before preparing for the delicate surgery. This was where she thrived, saving lives, transcending barriers with skill and precision. Hours later, the operation was a success. As she emerged from the OR, the patient's family rushed to thank her, tears of relief streaming down their faces. Their gratitude reminded her why she endured the indignities, the challenges. But it also reinforced her determination to speak out. That evening, back in her hotel room, Eleanor opened her laptop and began writing. Her words flowed as she recounted the incident at the airport, not as a personal grievance, but as a reflection of a systemic issue. She wrote about the humiliation, the resilience it demanded, and the deep-seated biases still entrenched in society. The next day, her story was published in a prominent medical journal and quickly went viral. Headlines emerged: renowned surgeon challenges racial bias after airport incident. Conversations erupted online and in boardrooms, not just about Eleanor's experience, but about the broader realities of implicit racism faced by professionals of color in every field. Messages of support poured in, from young aspiring surgeons, seasoned doctors, and people who saw their own struggles reflected in her story. A few emails were more personal. "I've been in your shoes. Thank you for speaking up. Your courage has inspired me to confront injustice in my own workplace." Even the airline issued an official apology and promised to review its staff training protocols. While Eleanor knew such promises were often superficial, it was a start. A week later, Eleanor was back in her hometown, addressing a packed auditorium at a conference for medical professionals. Her voice was steady and resolute as she spoke about the challenges she had faced and the responsibility each person had to challenge discrimination in all its forms. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to show your support. "This isn't just my story," she concluded, looking out at the audience. "It's a story of how we, as a society, need to stop asking people to prove their worth simply because of the color of their skin. Change starts with us, each of us." The room erupted in applause. Eleanor stood there, poised and unyielding, as she realized her journey wasn't just about being a skilled surgeon. It was about being a voice for justice, a catalyst for change. And somewhere, in that sea of faces, she knew seeds were being planted, seeds of empathy, action, and hope for a future where dignity was a given, not a fight.